Right now you feel scattered, pulled, unfocused, but remain loyal to one inner assumption tonight, and tomorrow the world will echo it back. It cannot do otherwise. There is a power at work in your life that operates so quietly, so faithfully, that most men never notice it, and yet it is the only power that ever truly acts. It is not found in effort, nor in strain, nor in the frantic motion of trying to make things happen. It is found in the direction of your attention. Wherever your attention rests, there your life is forming. This is not poetry, it is law, and the law is impersonal, exact, and unfailing. It does not ask whether you are aware of it. It simply responds. From morning until night, the average man gives his attention away without thought, without discipline, without reverence. He allows it to be seized by moods, by news, by idle conversations, by the endless parade of appearances that claim authority over his inner world. And because attention is the channel through which imagination moves, he unknowingly authorizes these appearances to shape his future. He lives under the illusion that life is something happening to him, not something flowing from him. Yet the whole vast drama of his experience rises from the simple question of what he consistently consents to in consciousness. Attention is not neutral, it is creative. To attend to a thing is to give it life, to nourish it, to allow it to take root within you. That is why Scripture speaks so plainly when it warns against divided focus, against the man who attempts to walk in two directions at once. The mind that wavers, that looks forward and then immediately looks back, that assumes and then doubts, cannot move with power. It dissipates its force, and force once dissipated must be painfully gathered again. This is why so many desires seem slow, distant, or impossible, not because the desire is too great, but because the attention given to it is too thin. The secret, then, is not in acquiring more techniques, more affirmations, more knowledge. The secret is in simplification. It is in learning how to rest your attention upon one idea with such steadiness, such loyalty, that it begins to feel natural, familiar, and unquestioned. When attention is unified, imagination moves without resistance. When imagination moves without resistance, time itself yields. What once seemed far off begins to approach, not by force, but by inevitability. Tonight, you are not being asked to add something new to your life. You are being asked to withdraw your power from dispersion and return it to its rightful center. You are being invited to discover what happens when the mind stops wandering, when it ceases to sample possibilities, and instead commits to one assumption and remains faithful to it. For in that faithfulness lies the power of the idea, and in the power of the idea lies the collapse of every distraction into fulfillment. You are told in the book of James that a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, and this is not a moral judgment, but a psychological and spiritual diagnosis. The instability does not come from external pressure. It comes from divided consent within. We are creatures of habit, and habit operates as a compelling law, moving us along well-worn tracks whether we are conscious of it or not. When attention is allowed to wander freely, drifting from mood to mood and impression to impression, the individual is not awake in the true sense of the word. He is functioning mechanically, responding rather than originating, reflecting rather than directing. What appears to be a harmless interruption is rarely harmless at all, because attention is the most valuable currency you possess. Every time it is scattered, it is spent, not invested. Thoughts, when given casually, return little. Thoughts, when given deliberately and with feeling, compound. The man who breaks his inner continuity to check whether his assumption is working or to measure his progress against appearances has already withdrawn his faith from the unseen act. In that moment, he steps down from the inner state that was carrying him forward, much like the one who looks back after mounting the colt and finds himself no longer moving toward Jerusalem. The tragedy is not in the interruption itself, but in the cost that follows it. A high mood, once broken, does not instantly return. It must be rebuilt, re-entered, and refelt, and that rebuilding requires time. Time, in this sense, is not measured by clocks, but by distance in consciousness. It is the space created between the individual and the state he had momentarily occupied. Each lapse in attention widens that distance, making the desire feel further away, heavier, and more effortful than it ever needed to be. Most men do not realize that their greatest delays are self-inflicted, not through wrongdoing, but through inattentiveness. They touch a state and then abandon it. They assume a feeling and then immediately question it. They begin to ride the mood of fulfillment and then dismount to see if the world agrees. In doing so, they undo the very movement that would have carried them forward. The law is precise. Whatever you remain faithful to in feeling becomes your dwelling place. Whatever you visit briefly and then leave remains a memory, not a reality. There is a quiet discipline hinted at in Scripture when it declares, "This one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, I press toward the mark." It is not a statement of effort, but of exclusion. Power does not come from doing many things at once. It comes from doing one thing without inner conflict. The mind that attempts to entertain several ends at the same time weakens each of them, not because the ends are incompatible, but because attention cannot be divided without being diminished. The secret, therefore, is not expansion, but restriction. To restrict the imaginary action does not mean to limit desire. It means to condense it. Instead of scattering imagination across a sequence of scenes, explanations, and possibilities, the individual selects a single act that implies the fulfillment of his desire and allows everything else to fall away. This act becomes the doorway through which the whole state is entered. When imagination is trained to return again and again to that one condensed scene, it begins to take on weight, substance, and familiarity. What was once an idea becomes an experience, and what becomes an experience begins to feel real. Reenactment is the key, not repetition born of anxiety, but repetition born of love. The scene is revisited not to force results, but because it is pleasing to dwell there. Each return deepens the feeling of reality until the act is no longer something being imagined, but something being remembered. At that point, imagination has completed its work. The mind has accepted the state as natural, and nature always expresses what the mind accepts as normal. This is the spiritual application of doing exactly one thing. The power lies not in the complexity of the scene, but in its implication. One simple action, faithfully assumed, carries within it the entire fulfillment. When attention is no longer jumping from image to image, from hope to doubt, from future to present, it gathers itself into a single point. And when attention is gathered into a single point, it becomes force. If you want to master the power of your attention and turn every thought into fulfillment, subscribe now and stay connected to the teachings that shape reality itself. Let us consider the figure of Jake, not as an individual apart from us, but as a pattern of mind that appears wherever discipline has not yet been cultivated. Jake represents the man who lives primarily by what the senses report, and because of this, he finds it difficult to believe in that which cannot yet be seen. His faith rises and falls with circumstances. When the outer world appears favorable, he feels hopeful. When it contradicts his desire, he becomes discouraged. In this way, his inner state is constantly being dictated by external events, rather than directing them. Jake accepts life on the basis of the world without, unaware that the world he is reacting to is the echo of past inner conversations. He listens to headlines, absorbs the emotional climate of the day, and allows the collective moods of society to move freely through his mind. Each reaction feels justified, even reasonable, yet these reactions quietly reinforce the very conditions he wishes to escape. He does not see that his constant commentary on appearances is an act of creation, shaping tomorrow from the standpoint of yesterday. His struggle lies in a fundamental misunderstanding. He attempts to rearrange the surface of life while leaving the concept of himself untouched. He wants different results without assuming a different identity. He desires change, yet continues to occupy the same inner position from which the old world was produced. This effort is exhausting because it moves against the law rather than with it. The law requires a change of state first, and expression follows. Jake's story is not told to condemn, but to reveal. It shows how easily power is surrendered when attention is given to effects instead of causes. The undisciplined man is not weak. He is simply unaware of where his strength lies. Once he discovers that the world responds not to his wishes, but to his assumptions, and that assumptions are sustained by attention, the entire struggle begins to dissolve. There is a distinction that changes everything once it is truly grasped, and it is the difference between thinking of a goal and thinking from it. To think of a state is to place it at a distance, to hold it before you as something separate and future. In that posture, No matter how sincere the desire, you are confessing absence. The mind remains divided, one part reaching forward, while another remains anchored in the present conditions. This division weakens the act of imagining, because imagination only creates from where it stands, never from where it observes. To think from the goal, on the other hand, is to enter it. It is an act of psychological relocation. The individual no longer contemplates the wish as an object, but inhabits it as a condition. In this movement, something subtle yet profound occurs. The question of whether it will happen dissolves. There is no longer a future to be waited for, because the state is being lived now inwardly and quietly. The mind stops negotiating with reality and begins to rest in assumption. True immersion requires a form of surrender, not to circumstance, but to the feeling of the fulfilled desire. One abandons the old mental posture, not through struggle, but through love for the new state. The feeling becomes preferable, even intimate. It is returned to not out of obligation, but because it feels like home. When this happens, the former state loses its emotional charge. It may still appear in the world of facts, but it no longer commands attention, and without attention, it cannot persist. This is what it means to become the thing itself. The individual is no longer attempting to bring about a change. He has changed. He no longer visits the new state as a guest. He lives there as a resident. From this residence, life rearranges itself naturally, without force or calculation. The outer world, which once seemed solid and unyielding, reveals itself as fluid, responsive, and obedient to the inner act that has been faithfully sustained. There is a reason the ancient instruction says, "When you pray, enter into your closet, and when you have shut your door, pray to your Father which is in secret." This counsel is not concerned with physical walls, but with the inner threshold between sensation and imagination. The door that must be shut is the door of the senses. For as long as it remains open, the mind is continually pulled back into appearances. Prayer in its true meaning is not petition, but acceptance. And acceptance cannot occur while the senses are arguing for a contrary state. To close this door requires a deliberate withdrawal from the external stream of impressions. The body is stilled, not as an act of discipline, but as an act of kindness to the mind. When the physical organism is immobilized, the constant demand to respond to the world begins to fade. The eyes no longer search, the ears no longer anticipate, and the attention, freed from its outward duties, naturally turns inward. This inward turning is the beginning of creative power. As the senses grow quiet, a peculiar state emerges, one that is neither full wakefulness nor sleep. In this state, the sharp edges of the objective world soften, and imagination becomes vivid, pliable, and receptive. It is here that assumptions are most easily accepted, not because the mind is passive, but because it is unified. There is no longer a tug-of-war between what is seen and what is assumed. The assumed state moves in without resistance. Within this inner stillness, the imagined act is allowed to unfold gently and naturally. It is not forced into clarity. It clarifies itself. The feeling associated with the fulfilled desire is invited and permitted to expand, filling the mind without interruption. When the door of the senses is tightly shut, the new claim is honored almost effortlessly, because there is nothing present to deny it. The mind, having only one thing before it, accepts that one thing as real. There is a principle at work in the universe, subtle yet exact, which governs all motion, all energy, all manifestation. It is the principle of least action, and it teaches that the path of greatest efficiency is the one in which energy is applied with precision and purpose, rather than scattered in vain. When the mind is focused on a single act, a single sensation, a single assumption, it aligns with this principle. The work that once required struggle and countless efforts becomes effortless, because attention itself collapses the distance between desire and fulfillment. When Jake applied this principle, he discovered that time itself seemed to bend. Tasks that had previously consumed a week of effort were completed in an hour. This was not by force or calculation, but because the mind, fully absorbed, acted in accordance with its own natural laws. Energy and attention, when united, do not oppose the world. They flow through it, meeting minimal resistance, guiding circumstances toward the intended end without the friction of doubt or distraction. The feeling of naturalness is the measure of success in this process. If the act of assuming the wish fulfilled feels forced, The law resists. If it feels ordinary, natural, inevitable, then the law responds, and life arranges itself accordingly. Jake's breakthrough was not in devising methods or seeking evidence, it was in allowing the assumption to become the dominant current of his consciousness. By focusing fully, he experienced the principle of least action in motion, and what once required struggle was now the product of quiet, deliberate attention. In this state, the mind operates with clarity and power. The distractions that once held sway are dissolved, because attention no longer feeds them. The inner world concentrated commands the outer. The unseen mechanisms that govern results respond to the feeling of certainty, and the collapse of time follows. This is the breakthrough. Mastery of attention transforms energy into reality, with a precision that seems miraculous only because it is so rarely practiced. Jake's journey is not merely a story of achievement, it is a testament to the profound power that lies in concentrated, unwavering attention. He did not reach his goal through struggle, planning, or frantic effort, nor did he manipulate circumstances with force or willpower. Instead, he aligned his inner consciousness with the state of fulfillment, allowing life itself to respond naturally to the clarity and depth of his assumption. Attention, as Neville Goddard emphasizes, is the spearhead of imagination. It is the instrument through which reality is molded, and when it is fully focused, it directs the currents of life toward the desired outcome with an elegance that appears effortless to the observer. The essential difference lies in the quality of inner focus. Jake did not merely think about attending MIT, nor did he hope that the events of the world might somehow align in his favor. Thinking of the goal places it at a distance. It frames desire as something external to be achieved, contingent upon circumstances outside oneself. To think from the goal, however, is to inhabit it fully in consciousness, to live in the state that one wishes to manifest. In this state, there is no question, no struggle, and no waiting. The assumption itself becomes a reality within, and reality outside cannot resist the coherent force of such a state. It is this principle that transformed Jake's ambition into inevitable manifestation. As Jake focused his attention, he discovered that life began to rearrange itself. Opportunities, solutions, and insights appeared not as random occurrences, but as natural responses to the state he sustained. The four-dimensional self, the aspect of consciousness that transcends the linear passage of time, worked quietly and precisely, orchestrating circumstances in ways he could not have devised consciously. The methods, the steps, and the outcomes unfolded automatically, guided by the invisible intelligence that attends to a mind unified in assumption. By mastering his attention, Jake no longer had to labor or worry. The fulfillment of his desire became the natural consequence of the state he occupied within. What is most remarkable is that this outcome did not rely on external validation or proof. Jake's world reflected his inner certainty, not his outer scrutiny. The appearance of obstacles, delays, or contradictions had no power to sway him because his consciousness remained rooted in the state of completion. He did not react to the world reacted to him. The traditional sense of effort, of pushing against resistance, dissolved because he had entered the principle of least action mentally, applying energy and attention in a single concentrated direction rather than scattering them across doubt, fear, and distraction. In this way, time itself seemed to compress. Weeks of struggle that might have been required were condensed into hours because the inner current had been correctly aligned. Jake's outcome illustrates the profound truth that life's results are not determined by external events, but by the inner landscape of consciousness. To master attention is to master destiny. Every thought, every assumption, every feeling that is sustained with focus acts as a seed in the fertile soil of the imagination. When that seed is nourished through unbroken attention, it grows, matures, and eventually manifests without strain. Jake's achievement demonstrates that the outer world is a mirror of the inner, that the acceptance of the end in consciousness is the invisible architect of reality, and that the mastery of attention transforms the impossible into the inevitable. The lesson is clear. The mind, when concentrated and faithful, is more powerful than any external circumstance, and attention, when skillfully wielded, collapses every distraction, every obstacle, into the certainty of fulfillment. There is a transformative law at work within the mind, subtle yet precise, which governs not only thought, but the very structure of consciousness itself. When Scripture commands, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind," it is not employing metaphor or exaggeration. It is speaking literally. The mind is a living, responsive instrument shaped by the inner conversations we habitually entertain. Every repeated thought, every sustained assumption leaves a track, a groove in the mental landscape, and these grooves determine the form and quality of perception, experience, and action. When attention is concentrated on a single assumption, the structure of the mind itself begins to rearrange, opening pathways through which reality flows. Control over inner speech is the cornerstone of this process. The words we utter to ourselves, the images we hold in consciousness, are not inert. They are the threads from which the fabric of reality is woven. Jake's success, like that of all who master attention, was not coincidental but the inevitable outcome of precise mental cultivation. By consciously directing his focus and consistently sustaining the feeling of the wish fulfilled, he altered not only his perception, but the underlying architecture of his mind. Thinking follows the tracks laid down by inner conversation. Change the tracks, and thinking follows naturally. Change thinking, and the environment transforms in response. The mind's ability to restructure itself is further reinforced by repetition and emotional intensity. The deeper the feeling accompanying the assumption, the more powerfully the mind accepts it as real. Here, the biological and psychological processes converge with the metaphysical principle. Neurons strengthen through repeated activation, and consciousness solidifies what it attends to with clarity and fidelity. Attention is the vehicle through which imagination communicates with both the conscious and subconscious mind, integrating new states into the very foundation of thought, behavior, and perception. When this process is understood, it becomes clear why so many fail to manifest their desires despite fervent effort. They scatter attention, vacillate between contradictory assumptions, or allow outer appearances to dictate inner conviction. The science is unforgiving in its precision. Sustained, focused attention produces a measurable restructuring of consciousness, which in turn produces the corresponding outer effect. Jake's transformation demonstrates that the mind is neither static nor passive. It is a dynamic instrument that, when directed with single-minded purpose, reshapes the world by reshaping itself. This principle, the control and refinement of inner speech, is the bridge between desire and manifestation, between thought and reality, and between possibility and certainty. The way we inhabit each moment determines the texture, depth, and richness of life itself. Most men move through their days as automatons, reacting mechanically to events, responding out of habit, and allowing time to pass without conscious engagement. Their attention is scattered across trivialities, their awareness occupied by fleeting impressions, and as a result, their experiences lack vitality. Life becomes a series of repetitions, disconnected from presence, echoing past patterns rather than reflecting the creative potential of the present. In this state, even the simplest pleasures are dulled, and even the most extraordinary circumstances fail to inspire, because the individual is not truly living them from a conscious position of engagement. To change the quality of life is to alter the inner landscape of attention. When one is fully present, every moment acquires significance. Ordinary acts, eating a meal, speaking with another, walking through a familiar space, become opportunities for conscious participation. The senses previously taken for granted awaken to their full potential. Flavors are richer, colors more vivid, sounds more resonant. Even conversation takes on depth because the listener is fully engaged, no longer a passive receptor of words, but an active participant in the unfolding of each encounter. Presence itself elevates experience, transforming what was once routine into a series of meaningful, memorable events. This heightened quality arises from the alignment of attention with intention. By consciously investing attention rather than scattering it, the mind ceases to dwell in autopilot. Every action is no longer a reflex, but a deliberate extension of the inner state. Time, rather than being lost to distraction, becomes a medium through which creativity and fulfillment are expressed. The moments of life are no longer consumed. They are invested, yielding satisfaction, clarity, and a sense of mastery over existence. In this investment, the individual discovers a new rhythm, one in which inner coherence generates outer harmony. The practice of being fully present also deepens one's sense of responsibility and engagement with the world. Life ceases to be merely observed and becomes co-created. Each thought, feeling, and act carries weight, because the mind is attentive to its influence on both inner and outer reality. This is the antidote to the mechanized existence most people accept as normal. By cultivating presence, attention, and focus, one elevates the ordinary into the extraordinary. Life, once fragmented and mechanical, becomes unified, vibrant, and expressive, reflecting the power of consciousness to shape the lived experience in every dimension. Presence is not merely an act. It is a state in which life itself becomes rich, responsive, and alive. The essence of all transformation, all fulfillment, and all mastery is rooted in the depth and fidelity of attention. It is not circumstances, nor intellect, nor material resources that determine the course of life. It is the focused application of consciousness, the undivided energy directed toward a single, coherent idea that shapes reality. Attention is the instrument of creation, and its proper cultivation is the pearl of great price. Scripture illustrates this through the parable of the merchant seeking fine pearls, who, upon discovering one of extraordinary value, sells everything to acquire it. In this allegory, the pearl represents concentrated attention, the unwavering engagement of mind and feeling with a singular state of reality, the assumption of a desired outcome as already fulfilled. All else in life becomes secondary, fleeting, or even obstructive when compared to the power of this single inner resource. To acquire this pearl, one must relinquish every distraction, every divided loyalty, and every belief in the existence of power outside oneself. Every outward condition, every appearance, every external measure of success or failure becomes irrelevant when attention is fully directed inward. The individual learns to inhabit a state that is internally coherent, internally consistent, and emotionally real. The mind, when concentrated on this one assumption, becomes a unified force, a lens through which life organizes itself according to the inner state rather than the outer circumstances. The law of consciousness does not act arbitrarily. It mirrors precisely what is maintained with clarity, faith, and feeling. Faith in this context is not a passive hope, but an active felt experience. The state assumed must be lived internally with intensity, conviction, and joy. Doubt, hesitation, and divided focus dilute the power of attention and weaken the trajectory of manifestation. Each wavering thought, each momentary return to outer appearances, scatters energy and delays the natural unfolding of desire. Conversely, by remaining faithful to the inner assumption, one aligns with a natural law so precise that external means, opportunities, and solutions appear effortlessly to support the fulfilled state. This alignment transcends ordinary effort. It compresses time and removes struggle, allowing manifestation to occur naturally and inevitably. The cultivation of attention requires repeated practice, immersion, and emotional integration. It is insufficient to understand the principle intellectually. It must be experienced internally. The feeling of the wish fulfilled becomes the dominant current of consciousness, coloring every thought, guiding every choice, and saturating the mind with the reality of the desired state. When this happens, the outer world becomes a mirror reflecting the inner certainty. Obstacles, contradictions, and delays lose their capacity to derail, because the internal reality is no longer negotiable. It is assumed and sustained. In this state, life ceases to be a series of random events and becomes a coherent, responsive, and predictable unfolding of the assumed state. Ultimately, the core lesson is that the power to create, to shape reality, and to manifest desire lies entirely within the depth of one's attention. To master attention is to master life itself, for the mind that remains single-minded, faithful, and fully engaged becomes a directing force that orchestrates circumstances, compresses time, and produces inevitable outcomes. The law of attention is precise, infallible, and absolute. Whatever you give undivided focus to with feeling and belief will inevitably manifest. Every distraction dissolved, every moment invested, and every assumption faithfully maintained is a step toward the realization of one's innermost desires. Mastery of attention is mastery of reality, and in this mastery, the individual becomes the undisputed architect of life.